U saradnji sa Goethe institutom ugostili smo njemačko-britansku spisateljicu Katharinu Volckmer, čiji je prvenac Termin zaista postao svjetski hit. I sada ima Termin kod Maje Abadžije, kritičarke i članice kolektiva Pobunjene čitateljke, a nakon toga slijedi Termin kod vas u knjižari za potpisivanje knjiga. Uživajte.
Hvala imenjakinji na ovako lijepoj najavi. Dobro večer svima. Good evening everyone. I will be speaking in English to my guest Katharina Volckmer tonight. So if you don't speak English, please use the equipment that's available there to have your translation. So welcome all to Bookstan. It's good to see you. And Katharina, it's a great pleasure to meet you and to have this opportunity to speak to you. Katharina Volckmer was born in Germany in 1987. She now lives in London, where she works for a literary agency. And the novel we'll be talking about is called The Appointment, or A Story of a Cock, and it is your first novel. So this book actually has a very simple premise. It's a story of a young woman that is speaking to her doctor. Young woman is German and doctor is Jewish, and that is where is the dynamic of the novel comes from, actually. So this, we would assume that this is a conversation, but that's not really a dialogue. It's her confessional monologue, where slowly, as we read, we discover everything that we need to know about this very interesting person. She is melancholic, but she's also incredibly funny, incredibly witty. She is almost cynical, but at the same time very troubled. So as we find out during the novel, she's in her 30s. She's also living in London, and she's about to undergo a great major change in her life. And this conversation, if we may say so, with her doctor is something that of a starting point for a new life for her. This sounds all very simple, but as you will see if you read the book, and I really hope you will, that actually this small book, it looks small, it has plenty of topics, plenty of incredibly complex themes. It tackles history, it bravely faces the trauma, and especially the so-called German silence about the Holocaust, which is probably the first layer of meaning that you will encounter in reading this book. But also it has a lot to say about family, about love, about sexuality, about intimacy, and many, many other themes. I hope that we will get the chance tonight to speak about some of them. But first of all, Katharina, welcome again. And
thank you.
Yeah, and I would like for you to tell us what was your starting point when you started writing this book. What was the main idea or main feeling that drove you to write it?
This always sounds kind of insane, but I just started hearing that voice in my head at some point. And I started writing a short story that everyone thought was so problematic they couldn't publish it. But someone was like, oh, but you should maybe think about writing a novel. And I wrote it quite quickly, sort of, because it's like, it wanted out of my strange head and onto the paper. But of course, the themes are things that I've been thinking about a lot. And I think it was maybe a point when I was questioning my own identity on many levels. I'd been living abroad for many years, and I think to be able to write something like this, you have to live abroad for quite some time, I think, to have this kind of perspective on your own country, on your own language, on, you know, what you are rather than who you are. And yeah, so it was, I think it was the question of the body, the question of gender that was important for me, and to do this kind of thing that some people find upsetting, that I talk about these things in the same book. But for me, I always start with the body. It's like the starting point for everything. And yeah, it was I think a moment when I questioned our concept of identity. What does it even mean that I was born in Germany, I was born into this language, into this body, but yeah, what does that mean? And what does it mean if you try to change these things? Yeah.
Is it even possible to
Yeah,
change?
exactly. And yeah, what happens if you try? But I think even the fact that some of it is of course impossible, but my realization was it's still worth trying. Yeah.
I think that your heroine, that your main character actually also thought the same thing. Yeah. I would say that this interesting character actually, we could call this book a character study if she wasn't speaking with her own voice, in her own perspective, and revealing only so much that she wants. And this book begins in a very dramatic fashion. Heroine actually imagines herself as Hitler, as Adolf Hitler. It's very funny, actually. And this image continues with a series of really odd sexual fantasies that she has, and she's sharing it without restraint with her doctor. And it is interesting, of course, and it gave your book sort of provocative, controversial aura that may be a burden or maybe not. You will let me know anyway. But I think that everyone who reads this book will be aware that there is so much more at play there. That she is playing a certain game with all of these provocative images, so she can get into the dialogue with her doctor, but also with us as readers. What I would like to ask you is, how did you develop such a character that has this sense of deception towards her doctor, but also towards her reader?
Someone once said that I have a very uninhibited brain, and I think that's probably unfortunately true. And I think it's also something to do with empathy. Like I can usually get into other people's mindsets or moods or something, and so I just let her kind of run with it, you know. And I also let her run with it because unless you're German, I think it's hard to appreciate the situation she's in a sense that to speak to someone who's Jewish so openly is something that usually if you just say the word Jew to a German, they'll be like, you know, they kind of get really uncomfortable in their chair and they'll be like, oh, okay. And they kind of prefer to just not say anything or just stand there and dress in grey like me here today and say that they're really sorry and it was awful, but they don't want to go where it hurts. And I just thought, why don't we go where it hurts? And the sexy Hitler was one of the main obstacles to getting the book published in Germany, I think, because they thought it was in very poor taste. But I do think we have a collective obsession, and I also think that people hide behind these characters. They hide behind dictators because they say Hitler invaded Poland, and I just, no, he didn't. You know, they were like, it wasn't him in person. You know, like lots of people busy doing that, and. So I think her having these sexual fantasies, which we also don't know if she's making this up or if she
exactly, yeah.
Is, I think, playing with that, but it's also trying to break the ice with Dr. Seligman because, like all Germans, she kind of wants in on it. She wants to, because throughout the book she's seeking some kind of absolution, which she obviously doesn't get, but she wants to get to a point, you know, where things are friendly, where it's okay. She flirts with him. She's funny. She tries all sorts of things, and I think we try all sorts of things, and then in the end, she becomes vulnerable, and I think that's her actual strength. You know, when she kind of lets go of all of these things, and she just says, "This is what I am," you know, and that's kind of the bravest thing she does. I think fantasizing about Hitler is it's funny, you know, but it's not brave. But in the end, I think and also because the position she's in is a position of weakness. It's the position that most female bodies are in, is on their back with their legs spread, right? That's kind of how female bodies are in the world. And she's using this position of weakness to become very strong, I think. And 2 weeks ago, I saw the book on stage in Italy, and when I saw the ending, I was in tears, because I was like, oh my God, you know. She becomes so strong by becoming vulnerable, I think, in the end.
Yeah. Dr. Seligman, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is weirdly silent throughout the book. I said before this is a monologue, and it was kind of interesting for you to choose this, to make him silent, to keep his words out of the page. We can, as a reader, guess in her monologue how he reacts. He may be laughing, he may be frowning. Some of these reactions she transmits to us, others we can guess. But to me it seemed weird, and it seemed really risky for you to shape your book like this, to give her the voice, this strong, open female voice, which I really enjoyed. But also, on the other hand, I thought, wow, this is such a risk. Why would a young writer in her first novel take such risk that it's even, I'm not sure how to say it, but some people could consider that too self-absorbed, or not like it in not realize it in a way that you wanted to. So how were you ready for such a risk?
Well, when I wrote it, I wasn't really aware of this, but actually he has to be silent, I think, for it to work, because it makes her uncomfortable, and I think she has to navigate this silence, I think, and she's put on the spot, and she's constantly, you know, there trying to navigate this. But for me, it was very important that she's not talking into a void. She's talking to someone, and she constantly has to respect him and his presence. And I think we often don't do that. I think people often talk into a void, but she kind of has to balance that. And I've spoken, probably the most interesting conversations that have come out of this for me, apart from tonight, of course, have been with Jewish readers, and they said, this is so interesting, because for once it's not the kind of, because I think we've had enough of those narratives that we're all very familiar with, but I feel like, or I always felt like they stopped somewhere, and I thought, no, let's go that little bit further, let's, you know, see what really happens. And I always think of it as they kind of communicate, but of course he stays silent, because also this thing that I was saying before, that she's seeking his absolution, that of course she can't have it. And people always ask me, say, why don't you write his perspective next? And I said, of course not. You know, I'm insane, but not to that extent. And so yeah, for me that was crucial, that he's and actually in the play, someone was sitting there for an hour and a half, not moving at all, and that was his role, you know. And it's kind of like, because otherwise she wouldn't act like this. So we need him, we need his presence. And for me, he's like my favorite character, even though he doesn't say anything. I love him, but I think that's the key to their relationship. That she also becomes really unhinged, because she does this thing that you sometimes do, that I do sometimes. You know, when you're on a job interview or you're somewhere and someone just lets you talk, and then you just, you know, you lose your... you kind of lose your shit a little bit, and you kind of go way too far, and then you're embarrassed. And she does that too. She always, you know, kind of drifts off and maybe says things she didn't really want to say, and there you go. So I find this situation quite interesting, you know, if you just let someone talk, because I think a lot of people prefer to talk themselves. Right. So for me, it was very interesting to, you know, change that dynamic.
Yeah, we have to talk about that question of German silence or German guilt. And it seems to me that this book is another book on Holocaust, but is a book that Holocaust treats with such brutal humor and such honesty that it clearly stands out. And maybe I will be wrong in saying this, but it seems to me that partly this book came from the frustration with that stock narratives about Holocaust that we are getting mostly out of films, but also out of other works of art. And much has been written in previous texts or interviews about this fascination with Hitler in a sexual way, with the Nazism and everything. But it seems to me that there is a lot more of subtle details in your book that deal with Nazism and this toxic legacy that your heroine has to take on, has to fight. For example, there is this wonderful detail about this convention, I think, in Nuremberg. This is like a convention of sellers of washing machines. And this is, it's a great irony also, but it is somehow deeply interwoven in the narrative and in a story about her family. So I really like that very much, and I wanted you to speak a little bit about why does humor means to you? Why does it have to be approached with humor, this tragedy and this silence?
I think for me personally, I think it's the only way, because I think humor is an anarchic space, right? We don't even, I think, understand what happens when we laugh. And I think making people cry with the Holocaust is pretty basic stuff. It's not that hard, it's easy. And I think often there's like an element of emotional blackmail that I find quite uncomfortable. Like I really like this term holo kitsch, because I think there's a lot of awful stuff that's out there. And so I think the humor for me is the way in, it's the way to reach people, because if it's obviously very delicate, and I should probably also say that my first editor is Jewish, and so we are in conversation a lot about these things. And but I think it's very important, because I think that's a way to reach people. And the thing that interests me about Germany, one thing that interests me is because I think you cannot depict the Holocaust. I think it's something that I think is impossible, and that's usually awful if you try to do that. But the continuities you can depict, right? And I think I'm very interested in those. I'm interested in the history of the guest workers in Germany. I'm interested in, the over 200 people that were killed by neo-fascists in Germany. I'm interested in the ongoing huge problem that they have with racism, with anti-Semitism. It's not like they... And also, obviously, it's absurd to assume that they would, right? Like, that you kind of jump from this insane dictatorship to kind of some happy state of, So I think that was always an absurd assumption, even though people have worked with that assumption for a very long... They're still working with that assumption, But I think these things, like if you look at the language, if you look at the architecture, if you, it's so easy to see if you open your eyes, I think this way of thinking about people, like I went to a museum in Berlin, which this place used to be barracks for forced laborers during the Second World War, because I feel like it's not that well known that in Germany alone there were 13 million people as forced laborers who they had taken from other places, which is why they could keep going for so long. And they had 13 million, I think, in the occupied territories. And these people were paid according to a hierarchy. So if you were French, that was like the best thing you could be. And then it went all the way down to so-called, Soviet people. And I think this hierarchy is, for instance, I still see that very much in place, this way we think about people as, being worth more or less, or have, so I think there's so much that still that I still find very problematic. And in my experience, humor has been the way to make people think. Because people often tell me I love that. They say, reading your book has made me feel uncomfortable, and I'm like, yes, I have achieved something there. And they said, you made me laugh about things, and I felt like maybe I wasn't allowed to laugh about this. And that's the thing I think is interesting.
I ask you that because I feel that is precisely the problem in Bosnian culture as well. We have all these tragedies in our recent past, and there is a growing sense of not being able to write satire about it, to laugh at it. There is like another level of tabooizing these issues. So I think that it is important that this book is finally translated to our language, so we can discover that there are other ways of dealing with this tragedy. Yeah, there is one more thing that could be interesting here to the local reader. Your main character of this book is trying to move away from her national identity. I found it incredibly interesting, and I think it would be quite provocative for readers here, because here everything is measured according to national and ethnic identity, and seeing how a person can freely move away from it, even though it may not be successful, it is definitely a step towards a bigger freedom. So I was wondering if you could shed a light on that. What does national identity mean to your generation, to, I can say, our generation, because we're not that far apart as age is concerned? Is it really possible to escape this national identification? Is it something that's bigger than us, or can we be bigger than it?
So I think the thing that I said at the beginning, I think it's something that is worth trying. Like, of course, I will always be German, I can't, it's my, that's what I am. But for instance, I choose to write in English, I choose to write in a language that I learned, not a language that I was born into. And I think this book is in many ways a book about the joy of liberation, the pure joy of just saying, look, I might have been born this or that, but I can choose, and even if you obviously to the world you will never be what you would like to be, I think it's very, very important. And I think it's also very important that you find a way of stepping out of your reality, and that you find a way of looking at your reality from the outside. Because if you're always within, this thing, and within your language, and within, probably people will start throwing chairs at me. But I think it's like I think it's very important. And of course, from talking to people here, I realize everything is very fresh, everything is very painful, and I'm like the last person that wants to lecture you or give advice. But in my personal experience, it's when you live abroad and you're German, and then it's not a particularly glamorous identity, I think. But I think thinking about it and kind of contextualizing it, and also, I think my generation, and of course that varies a lot, but if you were lucky, let's put it that way, I think you grew up without patriotism. Like, it's a feeling I cannot relate to with any part of my body. It's like when someone waves a German flag around, I'm just like, oh my God, I just run away, because I find it deeply embarrassing, because I think you're a fucking fascist. But obviously you might just be a football fan or something. But I feel very uncomfortable, and I think not defining yourself exclusively via those things is something that I experienced as something very positive. And it's not all that you are, I think. It's not, your gender isn't all that you are, your religion, or your... Because what does it even mean, And I think it's worth giving it a go. That's what I'd say. I always say to people, write in another language. It's a wonderful thing. to do. It's a restriction, but it's a liberating restriction, if that makes sense. And and I think ultimately nationalism always leads to violence, right? Because you think that you are more. And there are, of course, situations like in Ukraine now. I fully understand what they're fighting for, and but generally speaking, personally, I think this feeling of patriotism, of course, in Germany it's coming back, and there are people who've always been proud, but for me, it's a feeling that I've never had, or that I can't. Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange feeling for me because we've got nothing to be proud of. So that's what I always think.
Does anyone?
Does anyone? But for us, it's just it's so obvious, no, that it's kind of an embarrassing identity. So, but I think you can learn. I always feel like I learned a lot from that, because I don't go around waving my little flag. So I think I found that ultimately I found it quite liberating in a twisted way. Yeah.
But the character of your book feels pretty much the same, and there is this wonderful part of the book where she says, "I wish for the world where everyone can pick their own national identity." It's not something we can do, of course, but to her it feels only just, so she can go out there and take anything that she likes and put it inside that identity as she feels. So that's kind of utopian thinking that maybe works within the novel, but I'm not sure about the real world. But what's interesting actually is that she has this family heritage that enables her to do the medical procedure that she wants. We won't spoil that for you because we want you to read the book, of course. So we will not tell you what is the nature of this doctor's occupation. But her grandparent actually gave her this money, this funds to enable her to go through that procedure. But also she has to reconcile with his Nazi past, isn't that right? So how do you feel about this irony? His money basically enables her to get to that freedom that she desires.
It's I think many things. It's a hidden reference to a novel by Thomas Bernhard, where in the end the character does that too. In Die Auslöschung, he gives all of his money to some Jewish organization. He inherits some absurd, but in his novels, people always inherit absurd amounts of money, and they give them away. And I think it's a question of what do you do with all of that stuff? What do you do with that? Their museums filled with Hitler's fucking cutlery. What do you do with that stuff? What do we do with all the Nazi architecture? What do we do? And I thought what she does is obviously quite extreme, but I think for me it was an image of what do we do with this heritage that manifests itself in so many ways. And in Germany there are many cases of people whose families became rich, during the dictatorship because they used all these people to work for them, and they became rich, and they don't usually do great things with that money, And for me, it was just a question of how do we deal with it? Because I think this heritage is much bigger than we think it is. It's in our language, but it's also, if you walk down the street, the stuff that hasn't been bombed flat, like for instance the absurd building in Nuremberg, because Nuremberg obviously is it's Hitler's Disneyland, and they are using money to restore this architecture, this awful, I forgot what it's called, Festhalle, I think, which was meant to be this absurd architecture that could house events for thousands of people, and it's fallen into disarray. And they're using state money to keep these places there intact, and I was just like, why don't you just tear it all down? Like, why do you keep it? You know? I don't need a statue of Hitler to remember him. You know, I don't need that, and I think it's insulting to the people that were hurt. So I think it's a huge question: is what do you do with the larger heritage that comes from these systems of violence, systems of oppression, like, you know, like now in the UK and in the US, they started tearing down statues, right? And people were very upset. And for me, it was just like, you know, why? Like, statues come and go, and surely you don't need the statues of the perpetrators to remember what happened. You know, like, I think that's a perverse logic, and so I think she's trying to do something different with her inheritance, which is, I think it's extreme, but that's her way of dealing with it.
Yes. This book is devoted almost entirely to this sense of identity. But as much as national identity, there is also gender identity, or more broadly, body identity. There is this idea that you are somehow closed inside your body as you are closed inside this national identity. Both have the same sense of inevitability, impossibility to escape, and she's obviously, as we said, trying to do that. But I think this defiance of this character to conform to these norms, be it national norms or gender norms, is the most radical idea in your book. And this is actually provocative, not the images of Hitler doing whatever, or Hitler in pajamas, that was cute, but this idea, I will not conform to any kind of norms. Why did you think this was important?
I think that's important to me personally. I think I've always found the way we do gender, obviously, because if you're born or raised a woman, you're at the kind of the rotten end of the stick, right? You're not at the good end of the stick, and I've always found that very oppressive and also absurd. Like, again, I think it's similar to the kind of Nazi heritage. If you really, really open your eyes and you really, really look at it, then I'm just like, why is this the fundamental way of looking at a person? You know, why is the first thing I see is, it's a man or it's a woman? You know, I'm just like, you could see other things, and I think it's a spectrum. I think gender is not A and B. I think it's a million different things, and I think if you don't let bodies be free, let them be at peace, like also what we see now with all this abortion horror, then I think people will never be free. I think it all starts with your body, and I'm very interested in that, and I'm also interested in trauma and how bodies inherit trauma, right? Like, I think they inherit trauma of victims, but also of perpetrators. And so, again, I was thinking, yes, you're born into this physical guilt. And I even think the Germans have a funny body language. That was kind of like they're always so awkward, and I think that's because that's what you are, you know. And so I'm very interested in this constriction that is your body. And again, what happens if you modify it? What happens if you change it? What happens if, as a woman, you go to a men's toilet? Because women are, of course, born into a system of oppression, of violence, and that's true for every country on this planet. Like, no matter where you go, it sucks, you know. And it's a state of emergency that's not declared a state of emergency, I think. And if you think about, in the UK, 1% of rapes get a trial, you know. It's basically, you can rape someone and nothing's going to happen to you because it's not considered. I think whenever it's a female body, it's just not considered important. Like, also this thing when she rants about the seatbelt and the fact that medicine. If you read the dose on a package of pills, it's for a male body. It's not for a female body. The symptoms of a stroke for a woman are different to a man, but you're taught the symptoms of a male body. You know, it's like everything is, and then you can get very, very, very angry, which I was for a while, and then you write crazy books about it. But it's and I always think that why continue with this system that is kind of broken. I think it's broken and it's never going to be fixed if you carry on as this and that. So I think, why don't we just stop it? But people feel very uncomfortable and they get really scared and say horrible things, and because I think it's something that if you allow yourself to think in that way, it's very liberating, but I think a lot of people are afraid of it. But yeah, that's, I think, what I felt about it.
There is this part in a book, I'm going to paraphrase it now because I read it only in Bosnian, where the character says that she dreams of a world where her body will not be important anymore. And this is exactly what you are saying. That is it possible even to somehow erase this idea of that big importance that body has in our contemporary culture? Can we do that at all? Or is it maybe a plea to leave this body altogether? What is it? I'm not sure how to understand this obviously desperate cry of hers. I want to get rid of the body. I'm done with it.
I think it's a complicated subject, obviously. But I think it's, for her, the body is a source of grief, right? As for, I think, a lot of women it is. And I think her idea is to get to a point where she can just be, basically, you know, because I think if you are born in with a so-called female body, then there is a million obligations that come with it. You know, you have to shave it, you have to do this, you have to do that.
But she's aware from the start, this is not the body that patriarchy wants me to have. I'm not that. I will never be that.
Yeah.
What can I be?
Exactly. Yeah. She's like, fuck all this shit.
Yeah, she's very self-aware in that regard.
She is, because I think for her it's been a source of pain, it's been a source of grief, you know, and she can also see how it's a tool of oppression, because I think at the end of the day, also this subplot with her mother, where she forgives her mother at some point, because she sees that her mother was just, because I think the relationship to our mothers is like so important, because it fuels the patriarchy. It's like the oil, you know, to the fire, because it's just perpetuated in that relationship so often, you know, and because I think it comes from a place of fear, and I think we need this kind of, because at some point she says the biggest thing you can do to make the world a better place is love your mother. Try and love your mother. Just try it. You know, and if you succeed, you will have done something really important. And I think that's true, because it's hard. And she just wants to be, and not to live in a world where the fact that she's born something means something, you know, where, like, for me, I always find it absurd that this might be different here, but Britain is they're very scared of nudity. They're like, you know, and as a woman you cannot be topless, but as a man you can. But a lot of men have bigger breasts than women, right? But it's true, you know. You know, they have moobs, but that's like not sexualized. But of course, if I'm topless, that's really problematic. It's just small details like this. If you open your eyes to them once, then you kind of go mad. And I think she just wants to get to a point where it doesn't matter, you know, where also we don't think, you know, you see breasts and you think, oh, a woman, you know, like where you kind of try and free yourself from those things, you know, which of course is another personal utopia of mine that we'll never see. But again, she's trying, you know. I think it's a lot of this is about trying and getting joy out of that, even if you don't succeed.
Exactly. When we are talking about body, there is this layer of meaning in a novel that somehow subtly ridiculizes this whole wellness culture, this wellness ideal, especially regarding mental health. And even though I believe that we do not speak enough about mental health, it's still stigmatized to talk about if you have some sort of problems or challenges in that department. But here, this character of ours, she's going to see the therapist, the psychiatrists, but these elaborate Hitler fantasies are actually discovered later that they are meant to tease him, to somehow make him think that she has many more problems than she really actually has. So I would like to know, is this Dr. Seligman, among other characters in the book, actually a sort of parody on these wellness gurus, these people who tell us all about positive psychology, because there is this doctor, American doctor, that has the same name as him?
Oh, really?
You didn't know that? So I basically Googled his name. I thought, okay, maybe you gave some sort of name meaning as in nomen is omen. But no, I found out that there is really a Dr. Seligman who is a proponent of positive psychology.
I love that.
And positive thinking.
That's the next book.
Yeah, it's a good idea. So I want you to tell me, in your opinion, why are people obsessed so much today with this wellness, this positive thinking, this positive psychology, everything that this psychiatrist, this Jason person is trying to impose on your character?
Well, I think because we have somehow ended up living in societies that make people very unhappy, I think. And we, but also I think this concept of happiness is probably problematic because it's kind of absurd to want to be happy all the time, you know. Maybe that's just me being miserable and German, but it's like a sort of, no, you know, you can't expect to be happy all the time. I think you should just stop that nonsense now. But I think we have sort of maneuvered ourselves into situations where people are desperately unhappy. I don't want to sound like an old man, but I think they spend too much. Maybe they spend too much time. I don't know why they're unhappy, but people are very unhappy. But people are also have this claim that they want to be happy and that they want to have good bodies, functioning bodies, beautiful bodies. I don't want to say the fuckable bodies. You know, they want to be kind of a lot of things, and obviously, if you want to be a lot of things all the time, you end up being very unhappy because you can't be all of these things. And the book, of course, a lot of people, when they start reading, they think she's talking to a psychologist, the kind of Jewish psychoanalyst, you know, and that's playing with that as well, because he isn't, but then at the same time, because he knows about her body, she talks to him so openly, because, of course, there's this dynamic that there's a secret that she keeps from him, but there's also a secret she keeps from her reader, and he's aware of that, and so she talks to him. And I think we do kind of need our bodies to be able to talk properly. But this idea of wellness, I just find it quite bizarre. And there's also a strong element of class in that, which isn't in the book, but I think we also live in societies where some people can afford a good body and others can't. And it's become this distinction, right? Like access to healthcare has become a distinction that, you know, some people can afford it and others clearly can't, and it's I think there's something very brutal underneath that. It's a lot of it is very laughable, you know, when you see the ads and all the stupid products that are meant to make you happy. But I think it's also this thing in capitalism that we make you unhappy, and but you can buy all of this stuff and it will make you feel better, and then you'll be unhappy again, and it's like this vicious cycle, and it's hard to get out of it because we're all susceptible to it, I think, you know, like it's this beauty of products, and you're like, oh yes, this, you know, this will solve all of my issues, and it doesn't. And I think the thing is, you have to find a way to maybe be happy in yourself. I think there's also this idea that something exterior will make you happy, and I don't think it will. Other people won't make you happy, certainly. And also all the happy products, I don't know, but Yeah. So I think there's a lot going on with that, the kind of wellness culture. And it's so stupid. I mean, a lot of these products are really ridiculous, right? Like the kind of water that has more oxygen. I'm just like, well, how? This is like, it's not going to make you happy. So I don't know what's going to... I think maybe we need to give up on the idea of happiness. I don't know.
Maybe we just have to be like this woman wants us to just be in the world, just exist.
Yeah, and I once spoke to someone, and at the end she was like, yeah, and she's just accepted that she's kind of mad, but that's just who she is. And I was like, yeah. She made peace with herself. And maybe it's this thing that you need to make peace with yourself, I think. It sounds very... But I think that might be the thing. Before you buy the water with the oxygen, I think you should maybe find a way to be at peace with your imperfections, you know, and with what you are and who you are, you know.
Okay, I think we are already... Yeah. I would like to open now a space for you, the audience, to ask your questions if you have them. Okay, maybe I should give you more time to think about something, but in the meantime, I have one more question. This book also can be read as a love story. Within this confession that she's making to her doctor, she often talks about this mysterious person, Kay, who is an artist, but not very successful one, who is a married man, but still having an affairs and using sex to somehow realize who he really is. And in another book, I feel that he would be a parodic character. We would laugh at him, but in this book, he was not that laughable at all. And on the other hand, it seems to me that he gives her this idea of every person being born with a broken heart. And it was really poetic and struck me deeply. I would like to know, what do you think about that? Why is that idea so important? And also, what drove this woman to him?
So I think he is also her broken heart. I think, you know, he's also her turning point, I think, because I think he, for me, in many ways, he represents the sadness of not being able to satisfy someone else's reality, you know, because he would like her to be something that she, for many reasons, can't be, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't love him. And I think it's kind of two realities clashing. And I think he represents a lot of her sadness, because, of course, if you do all of these things that she does, I think liberation also comes with loss and sadness, because there will be people that you're going to leave behind. There are going to be people who are not going to go with you. They're not going to go all the way with you. And I think he represents a lot of that. And at the same time, he's obviously also quite repressed. And he's someone who's unable to get out of his box. And I, you know, they try. There's all this. I love the idea of painting on bodies. This is like a thing, and they do that, and they try to overcome these limits. But she, at some point, realizes that that's not going to do it for her. You know, she needs to go further than that. So, and you know, sometimes in your life there are people that it's sad, but by leaving them or through leaving them, you kind of grow and you become someone else, or not someone else, but you develop, and you kind of need these frictions, I think. So I think I think he represents a lot of her kind of maybe emotional sadness that comes with this journey that she's on, because not everyone will accompany you, and of course I think sometimes and she has these regrets as well, because sometimes she's like, why did I do all of this? Why didn't I just stay at home and marry someone, you know, be normal, have kids and become a teacher or something like that, you know? But then there comes a point, I think, when you realize that's not who I am. This is not what I can't do that, you know. I have to do all of this crazy shit to be at peace with myself, you know. And I think also I think it's also about the fact that I think you can't love someone unless you love yourself, unless you've made peace with yourself. I think it's again this thing about happiness in inverted commas, but I think that other person is not going to do that for you. You have to do that yourself, I think. And I think that's what K is. It's someone the other day was like, "That's Kafka," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's Kafka." You know, it's Joseph K. I love that. Yeah, so I think that's what he is for me.
He could be, because this is a sort of stock stereotypical character that in her life and in her special mind somehow becomes more than that, and I like that very much. Yeah, okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? Anyone? Anything? Okay, people are cold, I guess.
Put them off.
Okay, read the book. It's an incredible book. You will like it very much. Let it provoke you. I think that should be the conclusion of this evening. Thank you so much, Katharina. Again, thank you all
so much for
for
having
being
me.
here.